Good morning, fifth graders. So today we are going to continue talking about some fractions and fraction operations. And today we are going to talk about comparing and evaluating expressions, or these number sentences, using some parentheses. So this is something that we've talked about a little bit before using whole numbers. Today we're going to look at it with some fractions. So before we kind of get into the expressions, into writing out the expressions, I want to talk about some of the words that we're going to see. So we'll see words like sum. When we see words like sum, then that means that we are adding. Subtract, obviously that means to subtract. When we see things like 3 times as much or times as much, means we're going to be multiplying. When we see words like product, we're going to be multiplying. We'll see things maybe like copies, and that'll also mean multiplying. So we want to make sure that we're paying close attention to the words that we see. So let's start with number 1. So number 1 says to write expressions to match the diagrams and then to evaluate. So when we see evaluate, that just means to solve. So let's look at the first diagram and we'll just kind of see what we notice. So we have a tape diagram. The whole thing is equal to 8 plus 9. And then the question mark, so what we're trying to figure out, is 1/3 of that. So we're going to, what we kind of start with is our 8 plus 9. So we're going to write that inside parentheses. And then we want to know what 1/3 of that is. So we're going to multiply it by 1/3. So now we're going to evaluate. So that means we're going to solve. So we're going to start with our 8 plus 9. 8 plus 9 is equal to 17. And we keep that times 1/3 on the end. And then we can solve that in kind of any way that we want to. I'm going to use the numbers. So this becomes 17 times 1 over 3, or 17/3. Now we talked a little bit yesterday about how we want to start getting in the habit of writing all of our answers in simplest form, which means we are writing any improper fractions as mixed numbers. So 17/3 is also equal to 5 2/3. And I'm going to draw a box around that answer and around my expression, since those are the two things this question is asking for. So let's take a look at this second diagram. So this time we don't know how much the total is. So that's kind of what we're finding. But we do know that it's been separated into thirds, where there's 3 of them. We know that one of those is 3/5 plus 1/2. So since that's something that we know, we're going to put that in parentheses. 3/5 plus 1/2. And since each one of those 3 pieces is equal to that 3/5 plus 1/2, we're going to multiply the whole thing times 3. So I'm going to draw a box around it, since that's my expression. So my first step is going to be to add 3/5 plus 1/2. So I want to turn these into fractions with a common denominator. So I'm going to turn them into tenths. So we have 6/10 plus 5/10 times 3. And when we add those two together, we get 11/10 times 3. And we get 33/10, or 3 3/10. Alrighty. All right, so let's take a look at some of these written out expressions, kind of in word form. So we'll start with A. So A says 1/6 the sum of 16 and 20. So when we see something that says like the sum of 16 and 20, something like that, then that's what we're going to want to put into parentheses. So I'm going to put my 16 plus 20 into parentheses, but I'm finding 1/6 of that, which means we're multiplying it by 1/6. And now we're going to solve. 1/6 times 16 plus 20, which is equal to 36. And then we can multiply this out, and this becomes 1 times 36 over 6, or 36 over 6. And when we reduce this, we're left with 6, right? Because 36 divided by 6 is equal to 6. So I'm going to draw a box around my expression that we wrote and around my answer. Let's take a look at B. So B says subtract 5 from 1/3 of 23. So this from 1/3 of 23 is our part that's going to go on or inside of our parentheses. So we have 1/3 of 23, which means 1/3 times 23. And then we subtract 5 from it. So that's our expression. So now we're going to subtract, or we're going to solve. So 1 times 23, or 1/3 times 23, we're left with 23/3 minus 5, which is also equal to 7 2/3 minus 5. Right, because 3 into 23, we can get that 7 times, and that gives us 21. We're left with 2/3 left over. And when we subtract, we have 2 2/3 left. So we're going to do one more together, and then I want you to try the last couple of them on your own. So C says 3 times as much as the sum of 3/4 and 2/6. So we have 3 times as much, so 3 times the sum of 3/4 and 2/6. So we have 3/4 plus 2/6. So that's our expression. So now we need to add our 3/4 and 2/6 and then multiply it by 3. So just like we have always done with adding and subtracting fractions, I'm going to turn these two fractions into equivalent fractions with a common denominator. I'm going to choose 12 as my common denominator, so I'm going to multiply 3/4, both of those numbers, by 3, and I get 9/12 plus 2/6. I'm going to multiply both of those numbers by 2 and get 4/12. So I'm going to add those together, and I end up with 3 times 13/12. So when I multiply that, this becomes 3 times 13 over 12. And I'm going to use my math magic skills, and I'm going to reduce now. So I know that 3 can go into 12. So I'm going to divide 3 divided by 3, and I get 1. And 12 divided by 3, and I get 4. So what I'm left with here is 13/4, which is equal to 3 1/4. There we go. So I want you to go ahead and try D, E, and F on your own. and then you can pop back onto the video to check your answer. Alrighty, let's take a look at D. We have 2/5 of the product of 5, 6, and 42. So that means that we are multiplying 5/6 times 42, and then multiplying that by 2/5. So when we solve this, we have 5 times 42 over 6 times 2/5. We can reduce here, so I'm going to divide by 6 and get 1, divide by 6 and get 7. I'm left with 35 times 2/5. So again, I can reduce, so I'm going to divide by 5 and get 1, divide by 5 and get 7, and I'm left with 14. For E, 8 copies of the sum of 4/3 and 2 more. So 4/3 and 2 more. And 8 copies of it, so that means we're multiplying by 8. So that's our expression. And then when we solve it, we end up with 26 and 2/3. And F, we have 4 times as much of 1/3 of 8. So we have 1/3 of 8 times 4. And this gives us 10 and 2/3. Let me rewrite that. 10 and 2/3. There we go. Alrighty, so let's take a look at number 3. So number 3 says to circle the expressions that give the same product as 4/5 times 7, and then to explain how we know this. So first we need to figure out what the product of 4/5 times 7 is. So I'm going to solve that up at the top. So this becomes 4/5 times 7 over 1, or 4 times 7 over 5. We're left with 28/5. So I'm going to leave it like that. I'm going to leave it as 28/5. So we have a couple of these different expressions. So we have, this one got a little bit squishy here, but we have 4 divided by 7 times 5. We have 7 divided by 5 times 4. 4 times 7 divided by 5. 4 divided by 5 times 7. 4 times 7/5, and 7 times 4/5. So let's take a look. Our first expression that we have is 4 divided by 7 times 5. Well, if we look at our original expression, our fraction is in fifths. So that means that we're dividing by 5. So we know that we can't have this one. Now that second expression, now that one is dividing by 7. So we can't have that either. So I'm going to cross that one out. My next one says 4 times 7 divided by 5. I know that 4 times 7 gives me 28 divided by 5. 28 divided by 5 can be written as 28/5. So that would have the same answer. Then we have 4 divided by 5 times 7. Well, we said a minute ago that our expression is being divided by 5 since we're working with fifths. So we can't have that one. Next we have 4 times 7/5. if we were to start evaluating this, this would be 4 times 7 over 5, which would give us 28/5. So that would work. And then 7 times 4/5 would give us 7 times 4 over 5, which again would give us 28/5. So that would also be correct. So these expressions we can write in a variety of different ways. So just kind of keep that in mind. Number 4, we're going to compare some expressions. And it says to try to solve these without calculating. So let's take a look here. We have 4 times 2 plus 4 times 3. And then we have 3 times 2/3. Or sorry, I misread that first expression. 4 times 2 plus 4 times 2/3. And then we have 3 times 2/3. So without calculating, we can look at this, and I'm just going to look at this part. I'm just going to look at the fraction part. 4 times 2/3 is going to be greater than 3 times 2/3. Because 4 times anything is going to be greater than 3 times anything, right? So 4 times 2 gives us 8, 3 times 2 gives us 6. And then whatever we have 4 times 2/3, we're adding on 8 more. So that means that this expression is greater than 3 times 2/3. Next, if we look at B, we have 5 times 3/4 times 2/5, and then 5 times 3/4 times 2/7. So since these two pieces are the same, we're mostly looking at what we're multiplying them by. So we have times 2/5 and times 2/7. So if we multiply times 2/5, we're kind of dividing this whole thing by 5. And if we are multiplying by 2/7, we're dividing it by 7. Well, if we divide it by 5, our pieces are going to be bigger than if we divide it by 7. So this would have to be greater than as well. So I want you to take a second and think about part C. We have 3 times 3 plus 15/12. And then 3 times 3 plus 15/12. I want you to think about which one of those would be, if it would be greater than, less than, or equal to. So take a minute to think about that. So if we look at this expression, all the numbers are the same, right? We have a 3 times 3 plus 15/12. The expression is essentially the same except for where the parentheses are. And remember that according to our order of operations, our parentheses tells us what we need to do first. So our first expression, 3 times something in parentheses, then we have 3 times 3 plus a fraction. Since we're multiplying the first one by 3, that whole fraction piece by 3, we can think of this as being 3 times 15/12 or adding 15/12. Well, 3 times 15/12 is always going to be greater than just adding 15/12. So let's keep going. We've got one more page to look at. So we have a table. Number 5 says, Colette bought milk for herself each month and recorded the amount in the table below. For A through C, write an expression that records the calculation described, then solve to find the missing data in the table. So we have a couple of things that we're looking at here. A, B, and C, we have some expressions to write, and then we also have to fill in some spaces. We need to fill in how much for April, how much for June, and how much for September. So A through C, that's what we're solving. So part A So she bought 1/4 of July's total in June. So July's total was 2, and if she bought 1/4 of that in June, June is going to be equal to 1/4 times 2. And if we multiply that, that's equal to 2/4 or 1/2. So June is equal to 1/2. I want you to try B on your own real quick. You can pause the video, and then when you're ready, go ahead and unpause and check your answer. Alrighty, so part B says she bought 3/4 as much in September as she did in January and July combined. So January and July combined is going to be our parentheses. And she bought 3/4 as much. So January was 3 plus July is 2. So we have 5 times 3/4, which is equal to 15/4 or 3 3/4. So in September, she bought 3 3/4 gallons. Again, I want you to pause and try out C. And when you're done, you can unpause the video and check your answer. Alrighty, so for C, it says in April, she bought 1/2 gallon less than twice as much as she bought in August. So in August, she bought 1 gallon. So twice as much would mean 2 times 1. And she bought 1/2 gallon less. So we're subtracting 1/2 gallon. So this becomes 2 minus 1/2, or 1 1/2 gallons. D, we're displaying our data from the table on a line plot. So we talked a little bit about line plots a couple weeks ago. So we're going to draw a number line. My number line is going to start at 0, and it looks like my largest number is 3 3/4, so I'm going to end it at 4. So in the middle, I'll have 2, and then I've got 1 and 3. And since my smallest fraction is 4ths, means I'm going to cut each of these into 4ths. And then we're just going to go down the list, and we're going to put an X over wherever that amount falls. So we'll start with January. We have 3 gallons. February, we have 2 gallons. March, we have 1 1/4 gallons. So I want you to go ahead and fill in the rest of those on your line plot. When you're done, your line plot should look something like this. And our last question says, how many gallons of milk did Colette buy from January to October? So we're adding all of these together. So since we're adding them all, we're just going to write them all out and add them together. So we have 3 plus 2 plus 1 1/4 plus 1 1/2 plus 7/4 plus 1/2 plus 2 plus 1 plus 3 3/4 plus 1/4. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to find all of just my whole numbers. So I have 3, 2, oops, not going to use that one yet. So I have 3, 2, 2, 1. I'm going to add those together first. So I have 3 plus 2 is 5, plus 2 is 7, plus 1 is 8. And then I'm going to find my halves and add those together. So I have 1 and 1/2. I have 1/2. So I add 1 and 1/2 plus 1/2, and I get 2. And then I'm going to add my fourths together. So I have 1 and 1/4. I have 7/4. I have 3 and 3/4, and I have 1/4. So I know my 3 and 3/4 plus 1/4 is going to give me 4. So I'm going to put that down. Plus I have 1 and 1/4 and 7/4. So 1 and 1/4 plus 7/4 gives me 1 and 8/4. And 1 and 8/4 is going to be equal to, I'll just write out 1 and 8/4 first. That's going to be equal to 8/4 is equal to 2, plus that 1 gives us 3. So 1 and 8/4 is going to be equal to 3. And then we just add them all together. 8 plus 2 plus 4 plus 3 gives us 17 gallons of milk. Obviously, there are a bunch of different ways that we can solve that. That's the way that I choose. However you want to solve that is totally fine. Super quick, I want to take a look at your independent practice. You've got a couple of questions here. Number 1, A and B, you're rewriting these expressions using words. So remember what our kind of clue words are. So things like sum, product, difference, times, things like that. And then number 2, it says to write the expression and then solve. So it says 3 less than 1/4 of the product of 8/3 and 9. So part A and part B, you are not solving. So you do not need to solve. But for number 2, you are solving. Now for 1A and B, if you would like the extra practice and you would like to solve them, you are more than welcome to, but you do not need to solve for A and B. You're just rewriting the expression using words. Remember, if you get stuck at all or have any questions, please let me know or let Miss Sally know. We are both here and we are happy to help. Alrighty, 5th graders, I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, and I'll see y'all later.